Good afternoon and welcome to Webinar Wednesday. First, a quick thank you to everyone for holding tight as we worked through a couple of issues to bring this very important presentation to you today. I'm really excited that we had almost 600 people register for today's presentation. I do want to remind you that it's eligible for 1 credit from the ACI. So, as always, let's get started by giving one of the attendees a chance to win a very popular TechNation Tour t-shirt. This week's trivia question is, today's sponsor, Fluke, is headquartered in Washington State. What is Seattle's oldest farmers market called? Answer now using the question feature on your dashboard. While you're answering, I want to take the opportunity to remind everyone about MD Expo this fall. It will bring HTM professionals from across the nation to Orlando, Florida for 3 days of learning, networking, and the latest advances in technology. Registration is now open. You can attend for free if you're a hospital employee, member of the military, or a student by using a VIP pass, compliments of Fluke Biomedical, which you can find in today's webinar workbook. If you did not receive a copy of the workbook, you can download one now on your dashboard under the handout section. To register for this event or get more details, please visit mdexposhow.com. All right, and the winner of the TechNation t-shirt this week is David Calypsi. Congratulations. The correct answer was Pikes Place Market. Webinar Wednesday would like to thank our sponsor, Fluke Biomedical, the premier global provider of test and measurement equipment and services to the healthcare industry. They serve biomedical engineers, quality assurance technicians, medical physicists, oncologists, radiation safety professionals, and are continually expanding their range of solutions to a broader range of health and safety professionals. You can learn more about this company by visiting flukebiomedical.com. Our presenter today is Jerry Zion, who is the Global Training Manager for Fluke Biomedical. Jerry, you may begin whenever you are ready.
Thanks a lot, and thanks all of you for registering and being participants in this Wednesday webinar. I'm speaking to you from one of the premier, very large hospitals here in Seattle this morning from the waiting room because my wife happens to be in surgery right now and is a patient of this hospital. The topic, therefore, is very important to us. It's all about best practices for patient risk reduction. And I'm sure that you all have had a loved one or yourself being a patient in a hospital, maybe the hospital that you work for. It's really important. And so let's get started. The simple act of connecting a patient to a medical device really does expose that patient to potential harm if that medical device fails or if it doesn't perform properly. And this is a risk that must be managed. So how do we do that? Well, a good quality assurance program for medical device safety and performance testing includes these 7 qualities. It ensures that there's an ongoing quality and safety and effectiveness of the medical devices in the inventory of that facility. It helps avoid medical device failures during critical medical procedures by making sure we've checked those devices ahead of time. It improves the clinical effectiveness of all of the people who take care of the patient. It reduces the total risk of device ownership by minimizing repair costs and keeping them small. And it upholds the staff morale and professionalism through positive patient experience. So I've experienced that this morning. Here at this particular hospital, everybody that we dealt with was very competent with the medical device devices that were connected to my wife, and was very friendly and had a certain assurance about them. They were very professional. They knew what they were doing. We help them do that by making sure that they are able to use the medical devices effectively. And this is really important. I'll get into that a little bit more deeply as we go through. We also reduce patient risk and improve the patient confidence because the medical devices work properly and there's not a lot of trying to figure out what's not right in front of the patient. Number 7, it complies with regulations and the medical device manufacturer's recommendations. So if you hear a little bit of announcement in the background, can't really help that right now, just ignore it. Know that I'm in a waiting room. So these are some of the examples of medical devices and test equipment that you might run into. So among those things that we can manage, the clinical factors include the medical device's function. What is its intended use? And that function, the question is, does that equipment function and perform in the clinical environment in accordance with that intended use, and especially life support devices and other non-invasive diagnostic devices and lots of little things that connect to the patient. We're going to manage the risk of misuse or failure by trying to understand what are the possible consequences to the patient if the device malfunctions or if it is not properly used. And we're going to manage that through helping with in-service and re-in-service training and making sure that the medical device is performing properly. We're also going to take a look at mission criticality. So if the hospital is providing a particular service to the community and the medical device or devices that are important in order to carry out and deliver that service are not available, then that means the hospital cannot fulfill its mission. The medical devices, therefore, would be identified as mission critical to delivering on the promise to the community of that service being available. So if we look at the medical device technology, we see that it should do 4 things. It should help sustain the high quality of care provided to each patient. It should facilitate faster, easier diagnosis to improve patient care and outcomes. It should be safe to use at all times for both patients and other staff. And it should maintain functionality and effectiveness through the life of that device. So not just when it's brand new, but all the way through. And this is how we ensure that there's a continuous safety and effectiveness and readiness for medical use, and it's in a systematic and repeatable way. Now, you all have preventive maintenance programs, but they may not all be created equal. So I want you to think about this, and I want you to think about what I'm going through this morning, which is, how do I want these devices to work since my loved one is connected to them? Maintenance factors. So the manufacturer maintenance requirements are provided in the service manual of the medical device. And the recommendations are based on the device type, its design, and the components inside. And only the medical device designer and manufacturer really knows this best. And so we look to that work instruction, the service procedure, and preventive maintenance testing procedure for that from them, and that's found in the service manual. We also want to take a look at the equipment history. What is its maintenance history since we've owned it, since it's been in the inventory? How prone is this device to failure or group of devices? What is the maintenance sensitivity? That is, the device failures may be more likely in the absence of scheduled maintenance and testing. All of these factors are important, and when we make good decisions by looking at this information, it helps to reduce the risk to the patient. How do we keep track? So most of you will have a computerized maintenance management system that is a database where you keep track of the inventory of medical devices. You also get your work assignments from there, and you track or should track, keep track of any recalls or any voluntary corrective actions on the part of the manufacturers of those medical devices, and any service reports from outside service providers. So that would include the service engineers from the medical device manufacturer itself, or any third-party engineer that's coming in to do work on a medical device or help you get through your preventive maintenance schedule. All of those need to be appended to whatever the work assignment was that should have been done. And that should be supported in the scope of work if you're outsourcing this information. And the contract that you have with that outsource, they should be required to provide you this information. There are also sources of information from outside your medical facility about how this particular medical device is performing in the rest of the world. You need to know that because the experience of the rest of the world is just as relevant to managing and reducing risk as your own experience with that medical device in your facility. And that includes ICRI or ECRI. They have their health devices alerts that are that you can subscribe to. You can also get online and check out the history, the archive of those. And ASHI has an inspection system that you can also take a look at. You can also take a look at the US FDA's website and look at what is the instance of incidents that have been reported. And remember, the FDA does not just look at only the United States. It looks at any manufacturer who is selling their medical device in the US. No matter where their factory is, they can go, and they do go, and audit that factory. They audit the service centers. They make sure that what the manufacturer said their design was intended to do and was safe to do actually is proven fact based on the data. So you can go for free to that website, whereas ICRI is a subscription that may cost more, that has a fee. It has a subscription fee. Along with all of this, when we do our work and make measurements during testing, we are exercising and doing what we call metrology. That is the science of measurement. And we want, in that science of measurement, we need to understand that the measurement that we just made is not necessarily the exact measurement. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. This is the concept known as uncertainty. And what we want out of our measurement and the uncertainty band around it is both accuracy and precision. And you can look on this slide and you can see the difference between accuracy, that is being a correct measurement, and precision, which is just being consistent in the grouping of measurements that you're making. So you can see that just being precise is not good enough because we could be off target, off the bullseye, whereas accuracy puts us in the bullseye. If we have both accuracy and precision, we are not only in the bullseye, but our grouping of measurements is much tighter, meaning there's much less variability, meaning we can be more certain that the measurement that we made is indeed the measurement that we expected. So here's a little bit more about what I mean by measurement error and uncertainty. Mostly we would think of a graph of error versus, for example, in measuring temperature, error versus temperature, the exact temperature that we're trying to measure. And you can see that the plot here shows us some things that are both, that are on either side of the zero baseline, with some being a negative error and others giving us a positive error compared to zero. But when we think about uncertainty, it's not just the measurement data point itself, it is the uncertainty band around that measurement. So this extended bar above and below our actual measurement point represents the uncertainty about that measurement. And it's a stack up of a series of different factors when you look at it. So we can see that the red lines are our upper and lower testing limits, our pass-fail criteria. And we can see that whereas the data at the top left or top right of the screen, those three measurement points we might consider being pretty close to the limit. And if we're only going to look at this medical device for testing once in a year or twice in a year, there could be drift of that measured value outside its acceptable limits. And we might or might not make a decision to do something about how close those are to the limit. But with the uncertainty bands, you see that it's very clear to us that we're already outside the testing limits when we consider the uncertainty of measurement. And that means that we absolutely should be doing something about probably the last 4 measurements all the way to the right. Definitely at least those last 4, to make sure that they are inside the tolerance band, the pass-fail criteria. In fact, whenever possible, we really want that to be more central to midpoint on that data plot. And we probably will make a calibration adjustment in order to bring that back in where we need it to be, so that if there's any drift in the interim between when we made the measurement and the next time we make the measurement, that it's still going to be inside the acceptable limits. Here's another way of looking at it. If we have our measured value, there are statistical data around that really do represent our uncertainty of measurement to the left and to the right of that measured center value. So the number that characterizes the dispersion of values is attributed to a measurand, that is what we're trying to measure, is based on the information at hand. So we also can define this as an interval about or around the measured value that we are reasonably confident that the true value lies within. So that would be our left and right probability of error. So how confident depends on what level that we need. For if you send your test instrument to a calibration laboratory like those that are operated by Fluke and Fluke Biomedical, we express our confidence value at about 95%. That is, we are 95% certain that the calibrated, the values that we're going to look at for calibration and accuracy of that test instrument are able to be achieved. That extra 5% represents the uncertainty that we have around those. So I hope that clarifies what uncertainty is. And that is important. It's important to you because every measurement you make has also got some uncertainties around it. And you need to consider that and make sure that you're making good decisions when you include those uncertainty bands that we're talking about. We also want to measure quality and measurement decision risk. If our uncertainty is large compared to the specified requirement, how confident are you in your declaration of tolerance or intolerance or out of tolerance? So those are things that we need to consider. So here we are with our measurement and its uncertainty. We're near the upper limit, or if so, the first one, we have a very high confidence that we're measuring the right value. But in the second instance, with the second data point, you can see that the uncertainty band is much wider. In other words, we are much less certain that that measurement is exactly right. And so there's an example of what we mean if the uncertainty is large compared to the specified requirement. Then we want to make sure that our test instrumentation is traceable, and traceable means that a property of the measurement result whereby the result can be related to a reference or a primary or a transfer standard through a documented and unbroken chain of calibrations that help us be more certain that that test instrument is going to measure correctly and do what it's supposed to do. So the traceability is critical, so you need to be sure that whoever you're using to calibrate your test instruments, it can show you what that unbroken chain of traceability is for the calibrations of their transfer standards that they're using to calibrate your devices. And here's the reason: because your measurements also must be traceable. And this is coming to you. We're trying to improve how we teach about this because there is a new international standards organization standard called 17025. And 17025 is going to, in a short time, require even you to report both your uncertainties and your traceability path in order to properly and completely document that you are making sure that the medical devices are safe and effective for clinical use. Believe me, this is coming. And so this traceability and the concept of uncertainties is very, very important for you to begin to understand. Although some of you have come out of training from military like U.S. Air Force or others where you worked in a calibration laboratory, and you well know all of this because all of this has been critical to the measurements that you've been making for a long time. But for a lot of the rest of us, we've really not thought about this. And yet it is critical to reducing patient risk in the hospital based on how we maintain the medical devices. Let me show you a concrete example and a short traceability path. At Fluke, at the headquarters here in Everett, Washington, we create the DC volt. We create that with a primary standard called the Josephson's junction array. And once we have that primary DC volt created, then we transfer it for use in our production lines and in our calibration laboratories for recal. So you can see the blue figures in blue are the uncertainty as we transfer that DC volt from the Josephson's array to the transfer standards and on through this very short traceability chain. So we go to the DC volt, from the DC volt primary to a transfer standard, and you can see that we add some uncertainty at every step. So from 0.02 microvolts per volt, for example, by the time we have transferred this in and done the calibration around DC volts in something like our electrical safety analyzers that you are using, you can see that our uncertainty is 50 microvolts per volt. So there's been an increase in our uncertainty just simply because we're transferring that volt. And you can see that our accuracy confidence here is we're accurate to within 0.1%. So very easily for you to see here how we transfer that through our production line and also through our recal. So not only does metrology underpin our technology, it also affects the patient risk. So if I give you a different example, let's say we're testing infusion pumps. Infusion pumps deliver a lot of things to the patient. They deliver saline solution, they deliver lactated solutions, and into those we infuse some other medications, some of which actually are much more critical, and the accuracy of the delivery of that infusion pump is much more important about. For example, let's take a cancer patient who is receiving chemotherapy to help kill off cancer cells. That chemotherapy medication is poison, and if we don't properly deliver the proper dose to that patient, if we overdose them, we're going to kill the patient. Same thing with something like an opioid. Okay, this is a narcotic. We can easily overdose if we're not careful and are not delivering this with enough accuracy, and making sure that our accuracy measurements are highly certain. That is, uncertainty is low. That's how come traceability and uncertainty matter in what we do, because as we go down through and as patients are connected to these devices. There's another thing that we need to be paying attention to then, that is the pace of change and innovation in the medical devices themselves. Medical devices today are not what they were 20 years ago or even 15 years ago, and in some cases they are different than they were even 5 years ago. And if you have had the same test tools that were designed 20 years ago and are using those to make your measurements, I guarantee you are not either at least not making all of the measurements you should be making, or you are missing the ability to properly test all of the functionality of that medical device. We can call out CT scanners, we can call out defibrillators, where we have more and more a shock advisory, if not an AED functionality, where the device itself is designed so that it can sense the impedance of the chest, the patient's chest impedance, and adjust the output energy of the defibrillator according to the impedance that it sees, so that there's enough current delivered through the tissue from outside to inside to make sure that that heart is properly defibrillated when the time comes, when it really matters. If you don't have the ability to test that functionality by delivering several different impedances when you're doing your testing, you are not fully testing that medical device. And if that device fails, you will have a much bigger problem, including litigation. So it's really critical that we do this job well and that we do it right, and we think it all the way through on the process. We should be tracking our effectiveness about our measurements, and this is quantifiable, and you can use benchmarks. You can also set up key performance indicators to track those things that you're trying to make improvements about, and you should be. And you should be meeting as a team within your department to see how you're all doing all together. The database helps us to capture and analyze these metrics. And we need to check how we're stacking up against the best of the best, not only in our community, but in the world. So we can use a benchmarking solution that Amy has available. It is also by subscription, so it costs some money. It's not free, but it allows us to evaluate our quality assurance program against the best of the best in the world, and get some information about how we can continue our improvement of our own quality assurance programs. But at the end of the day, it's really all up to you, to each of you, and to me when I'm doing what you do and I have done in the past. How well do you understand the goals and objectives of your medical device quality assurance program? How do you want that medical device to work if you or someone you love is the next patient that's going to be connected to it? What is the evidence? And evidence is still a preeminent guide to determine the frequency and scope where we're allowed to adjust either. Certainly here in the U.S., the CMS, that is those people who control in the government who control reimbursement to the hospital for Medicare patients, have weighed in and have put some restrictions on us that we didn't have before. For life support devices, we're not allowed to vary the frequency of inspection, nor are we allowed to change anything in the step-by-step inspection of the device. For other non-critical devices, we may be allowed to change the frequency. So outside the United States, we have a little bit more latitude still, and we can vary some other things depending on what our experience is with that particular brand and model of medical device. But you have to pay attention and know what's going on. You have to be able to make good recommendations to your director or manager. The manager and director, you guys, that's me too, I've been there, have to be thinking about what our real role is in the hospital. It's really to reduce risk of injury to the patient, and thereby the risk that the hospital faces of litigation negative outcomes, things like that. If you think that you're alone in the world, you're not. We certainly in each of the states, we have a biomedical society or a biomedical association where we can meet with other biomeds working in other medical facilities and manufacturers all together and exchange information. You can do that around the world as well, and you should. Whenever you're running into a problem, there's somebody out there who knows the answer, and you shouldn't just wait and not do anything or not know. There's plenty of opportunity to communicate and engage with the rest of the global community of biomedical and clinical engineers in order to get the information that is most necessary right now to you in what you're doing in your medical facility. So I encourage you to all make sure you're participating in things like TechNation and MedWrench, where you're exchanging information with a host of other people and getting good information. Those of you who have had a question, you've gotten it answered on those forums, know what I'm talking about. There's a host of other information about medical device quality assurance and specific trainings about using the test instruments that we make on our Advantage Training Center. So I encourage you to, if you're not registered for that now, please go to the website and register and get access. The access is free. It doesn't cost anything. It's there for you to help you do your job better. And we expect feedback. So we want feedback from you about what we're missing, what you would like to see more of, how it's helped you even. All of those things are important to us because we're here producing this information and sharing it with you for you. That's the end of my presentation, and again, I thank the TechNation and all of you for being there and participating in this morning.
Jerry, this is Jamie. I want to take a moment and extend a heartfelt thank you for today's presentation. As always, you set the bar very high for professionalism. We certainly appreciate you taking the time to log on today and give the presentation, considering everything that you're working through. And during the presentation, we got several well wishes from the attendees that we'll send over to you as well. But I also got quite a few questions that, if you're ready, I'd love to move into the Q&A portion.
Yep, ready to go.
Good. Well, just a quick reminder to all of the attendees, you still have time to submit your question. If we don't get through all of the questions, we're going to shoot them over to the Fluke team. They are phenomenal at following up. So with that said, the first question is, Jerry, in your opinion, what would be the first and most important step to start a risk patient program in developing countries?
The first thing that I would do in any case, no matter where in the world I am, is to understand what are the medical devices in the inventory of the particular medical facility that we're talking about. And that includes categorizing them according to, are they a defibrillator, are they a patient warmer, are they a defibrillator, and so forth. So doing a detailed inventory is really the first and very critical step that helps us understand what is the scope of the work that we're being asked to do.
Perfect. How does one ensure quality assurance of services and medical devices in a limited resource setting?
Wow, that's a good question. So by limited resource, there's a couple of ways we could think about that. One way would be limited resources in terms of full-time staff, full-time people to take care of the work. The other way we can look at it is a budget spend in terms of corrective actions. So let's talk about those two different scenarios because they are just a little bit different. when we consider that inventory of medical devices by category, certainly some of those things we're just going to run till fail. We really will. So a suction pump or a blanket warmer or something like that, we'll run that to fail, which means that we will wait until it fails and we'll do an incoming inspection when it's brand new. We'll test it for electrical safety, but after that, we're going to wait until that device fails because it's a very low risk in terms of the patient injury or harm, and mostly would be a nuisance. So there will be some of those devices in the inventory that we will treat that way. But the real critical devices, the patient monitors, the defibrillators, and so forth, we will need to establish a frequency of inspection. That'll come from the manufacturer. And we can also do our own independent risk-based assessment. We should come up with the same frequency of inspection as the manufacturer is recommending. That work has to be done. And there's a economic reason to do that work, and that is that the studies have found that if we run till fail, if that is our strategy, and we took that same strategy no matter how critical or sophisticated the device, it will cost us 30% more on a run to fail strategy than it will if we do the preventive maintenance. So right away we know if we do the scheduled maintenance, the preventive maintenance in accordance at the frequency the manufacturer recommends, we're almost sure that we will be able to save, not spend, 30% of whatever we would have spent. So how much is that? Well, you can estimate it by taking 10% of the acquisition price, the purchase price of that medical device when it was brand new. And you're going to use that same value, that 10% of whatever that was, every single year. That's what it's going to cost you to maintain that medical device. So 30% savings to begin with is pretty big, and year over year, maintaining that 30% is really a good value for the hospital. Otherwise, they're going to spend money they don't have that may be hard for them to get. In terms of head count, how many people do we have while we're trying to save this money? That depends on how we take that money we did not spend because we had staff, and how we outfit them with test instruments, how we provide space for them, how we provide continuing training for them, and or how we outsource. So in some cases, the first step will be, let's go hire somebody from outside to come in and augment our staff to help make sure that all of the work gets done. That's tough because it ends up costing more to do that, not less. Even when you consider that a full-time equivalent has to include benefits, and we all get healthcare benefits, among other things, perks from the hospital as an employer, and those have to be considered as well. So the notion is that if you hire somebody from outside, you're just paying whatever that labor rate, billable labor rate was, and not having to worry about the rest of the overhead expense of a full-time employee. Well, but step back a minute and realize that that labor rate that you're being billed for already includes those benefits for the people that are going to be coming out and doing the work in your facility. So you pay it one way or the other, you're going to pay it. You don't get to not pay it, is my point. So if you're a biomed and you're making $25, $30 an hour, that's what you're getting paid. Let me assure you, that is not what it would be billed if you were to be, if you had a contract with another clinic or facility in the same city and you were traveling to go do work there as well. The billable rate will be much higher. We think the billable rate right now is between $85 and $125 per hour, okay? So when you consider trying to shore up in a facility with limited resources, either staff or money, what happens is you end up just spending more money. So we're better off to add the adequate and appropriate amount of staff, outfit them, train them, make sure that they have space to do the work, and get on with it in a really good, sound economic way. I hope that answered the question.
Fantastic answer, Jerry. Another attendee would like to know, is an earth bond test compulsory for all medical devices, and does the ESA series support earth bond tests at varying currents?
This is a great question too. I actually had to go look up this one. I had this question come into me a week or so ago. So what is the earth bond test? You could say that the earth bond test is what is the protective earth or ground leakage current, and what is, before we make that measurement, what is the resistance of that grounding system. And the way that you measure that, of course, is by measuring the protective earth resistance. And yes, that is supported, well supported by our safety analyzers. Depending on and how well supported is depends upon the standard, the electrical safety standard to which you are testing, that you're trying to comply with. So typically we look at it this way. If we look at the international standards, the IEC 60601-1 is the standard that the manufacturer is required to meet in the process of proving that their medical device is safe and effective for clinical use. That earth bond test, the protective earth resistance, requires a 25 amp current flow in order to make the resistance measurement. And I go into much more detail about that in the electrical safety course that is in the Advantage Training Center. So I ask you to please go look at that and work through that course. But basically the answer is this, that everywhere else after the medical device has been delivered to the healthcare facility, we're operating on IEC 62353, which is much closer to NFPA, Amy ANSI NFPA 99. Each of those organizations, Amy ANSI and NFPA 99, have a little bit different point of view about electrical safety. And recently, the NFPA in the US had said, yeah, you know what, we've been testing this for a long time, nothing's changing. So, you know what, kind of just don't worry about it. You can just test it when you're ready. Not a really good idea, but also the requirements for that earth bond test are much smaller, as small as 200 milliamperes to do the test. So why is that? Because we've already done the earth bond test appropriately before. In the medical facility, the National Electrical Code also requires an installation test where we look and see exactly what is the pathway of that protective earth, that ground pathway, all the way back to a rod that actually is driven into the earth, into the ground. And that is what all the grounds are referenced back to, one way or another, from a building, especially a hospital. So the answer is it required? Yes. The only products, devices that you cannot do that test upon are the Class 2 medical device. When I'm speaking of Class 2, I'm talking about the kind of medical device that is double insulated. This is for electrical safety purposes, not US FDA classification. So the Class 2 device has no ground, no protective earth. There's no third pin, ground pin on the power cord, because it is intrinsically safe due to the double insulation. So you won't be able to do an earth bond test on that device. Similarly, in a Class IP device, again for electrical safety purposes, IP meaning internal power, like a battery, if the device is intended to be used on its internal battery, then you will not have a ground source to do that earth bond test upon. So it's required on all Class 1, electrical safety Class 1 devices for sure, and it is a test that needs to be run also by facilities in evaluating the power distribution system of the hospital to make sure that all grounds are indeed ground, connected to ground and nowhere else, no matter what else we're doing. Now there's another test that people sometimes confuse with this, and that is a HIPOT test. A HIPOT test does evaluate the insulation quality of the medical device, but it also is doing that at a very, very, very high current, and it is done for the purposes of safety agency listing. So this would be a UL or CSA test that would be done on a medical device to prove as we do design validation testing. Sometimes it's used in a repair where we've really opened the device up very, very much, but not normally a test that we do in the biomed department in a hospital anywhere. It has to do with the safety agency labeling. There's another test that you do during electrical leakage current testing, and that's applied part, mains on applied part. And that tests the isolation of the medical device and the patient connections in particular. So these tests are designed to evaluate different pieces of the puzzle about the electrical distribution systems, the safety of the design of the product, and in fact the safety in managing the risk of the patient by making sure that there is an appropriate and low resistance pathway back to ground for all electrical current flowing on the device.
Good. Well, I think we can get through a couple of more questions, Jerry. I have another one from an attendee. Mm-hmm. What is the future of electrical safety testing in relation to the NFPA, CMS, and Joint Commission?
So NFPA is a safety agency. It had to do in the past with life safety code. Now it's a little bit different. But they are looking at fire protection. NFPA stands for National Fire Protection Agency, and they're worried about fire sources more than anything else. But they do weigh in, and they are the ones that have felt that we have such a low risk about electrical microshock hazard, even in hospitals today, that we can reduce significantly and drastically the amount of electrical safety testing that we're doing. That's their opinion, and I direct you to them as a source, and they have a rationale statement you should read and make sure you understand their point of view. They are very different from the international standards. They are different from Joint Commission. Joint Commission is coming in and evaluating the environment of care. It is not just what biomed does, but what every clinical department does, and everybody who is surrounding the patient as the patient comes into the door of the hospital, all the way until they leave the hospital to go home. And the environment of care is that total environment and all of the interactions that occur. So it's standards of care as well as minimum performance and safety standards. So they're going to be looking for looking at your quality assurance program and looking to see that you are doing what you said you were going to do. They have a few things that they are asked to do a thorough inspection and report out on, and some of that has to do with things that the CMS, which controls the reimbursement to the hospital for Medicare patients, on what they're worried about. And I've already mentioned that, but let me just mention it again. CMS, as of the last decisions, requires that all critical medical devices that your inspection program adhere specifically exactly to the medical device manufacturer's testing requirements listed in their service manual. You cannot change the frequency, nor can you change, add or remove any steps. And that's what they have said. Whether or not that is the way it ought to be, that's what they've said, and that's what we have to adhere to, because at the end of the day, if the hospital doesn't get paid, guess what, my friends? Neither do you. So we're going to protect our pocketbook and make sure that we're adhering to that. So CMS controls money, and the National Fire Protection Agency, NFPA, controls the life safety code and parts about it that especially have to do with fire protection. And the rest of the story on Joint Commission is they're going to look at specifically what CMS cares about. They're going to look at what FDA cares about, which is following standards. Standards are followed by following the manufacturer's inspection procedure, because they are all compliant and conformant to that when you look at the steps. So they interrelate at the point loosely around managing the risk to the patient, but mainly they each have their independent point of view. I hope that helps.
It does very much, Jerry, and I still have quite a few questions to get through, so since we're running tight on our 60 minutes, I think I'm going to send the rest of the questions over to you as soon as we wrap up today, so you and the Fluke Biomedical team can contact these attendees as needed. Again, a big thank you to you and a great big thank you to the sponsor, Fluke Biomedical. We're going to wrap up and launch the post-webinar survey here shortly. It's going to appear on your screen. You do not have to exit out or close anything. Do remember that if for some reason you're not seeing the post-webinar survey, you can email us at webinar@mdpublishing.com. One lucky attendee will have the chance to win an Amazon gift card for completing the survey today. Again, a reminder of Fluke Biomedical's website, flukebiomedical.com. You can see the next webinars that are coming up in July at TechNation.com/webinars. Enjoy the rest of your week, guys. See you soon.